Good evening, everybody. My name is Khaled Safouri. I'm the Executive Director of National Interest Foundation. I'd like to thank you all for being with us. Before we start, I'd like to ask every one of you to sign up the sign-up sheet, your name, phone number, and contact information. Grab lunch. Help yourself with food and dessert, and sorry for the humble lunch. Would like to have more lavish lunch next time. In any case, I'd like to introduce our special speaker today. I think everyone knows and heard of David Hurst. I think I've been reading his stuff for many, many years. Mr. Hurst is the editor-in-chief of the Middle East Eye. He left The Guardian as its chief foreign leader writer in a career that spanned for 29 years. You wrote for The Guardian for 29 years, right?
I did, yes, yeah.
He covered many major events, the miners' strike, Brighton bomb, loyalist backlash. So I assume you covered the Anglo-Irish conflict as well. I know you have covered the war in Bosnia and Middle East. And I think many people here have read your stuff on Middle East for many years. Mr. David Hurst, also for the one of you that read the Middle East Eye, which I read it regularly, is a main source for balanced and fair news on Middle East. He covered, or the Middle East Eye covers everything related to the war in Yemen, to the Arab-Israeli conflict, to the civil war in Syria and other areas of conflict. He will be speaking for 20 minutes. After that, we'll take questions. But please, each person asking a question, state your name and your affiliation, and ask a question rather than a lecture or comment, so we can give a chance to everybody to speak. And I'll turn the microphone now to Mr. David Hurst. Thank you for being with us.
Oh, thank you very much for inviting me. Once again, I find myself in company that is far more knowledgeable about this subject than I am. So forgive me if I range outside the Middle East to answer the question which I've been set is, why does the West get it continually wrong? Can you hear me?
Is this microphone on?
Can you hear me? Okay. So forgive me if I range outside the Middle East to answer the question of why, which I've been set, the question of why does the West get it continually wrong in the Middle East. I'm going to begin outside the Middle East because I think it's impossible today to locate the mistakes in what we call the West only. Partly because it has sold the intervention franchise to other business ventures like Mohammed bin Salman and Mohammed bin Zayed. There are now at least three sources or creators of error, which I will call the decaying West, the angry regional actor, and the crumbling Arab state. Each believe they're victims, but each are also active participants in and aggregators of regional disorder. So, crumbling West. I first realized that the West, by which I mean the US, Britain, Germany, France and its institutions, NATO, EU, World Bank, IMF, were radically unprepared for the role that they were handed by the collapse of the Soviet Union, when I was actually sent there as a correspondent for The Guardian in Moscow in 1991, December 1991, January 1992, and I stayed there till 1997. There's one story there are many of that period, but one that comes to mind. Pepsi was jostling for a slice of the market with Coca-Cola, and someone in the head office here in Washington thought it would be a great idea to send 3 container loads of fluorescent pink fluffy bunnies to cheer the gloomy Russians up for Easter. The Russian fixer in Pepsi's Moscow office roared with laughter. Don't these idiots know that Easter is the most solemn day in the Russian Orthodox calendar? It's the Day of the Dead. He left Pepsi to become a trader, and the fluorescent bunnies were last seen on their way to China. The bunny episode was all part of living in what Russians would call Absurdistan. A president who had difficulty putting his seat back in the upright position. That Russians loved jokes on international air safety jargon. A president who gave the West all Russia's military secrets. A president who ignored Russia's backyard. What was seen as democracy promotion in the West was seen as sabotage in Russia. Transition economists were responsible initially for a greater loss in industrial production than happened during Operation Barbarossa when the Nazis were invading Russia. No one knew who Putin was, but you could see him coming. On the other side of the equation, the way Clinton handled Russia had much in common with the way Bush handled Iraq a decade later. The error did not start with 9/11. It was there a long time before that. And by that, what do I mean? I mean the belief that the West can break and remake states in its image, the idea that the West had a monopoly on the international use of force, the idea that there was only one system left, that there was and not only that, there was only one version of one system left, neoliberal capitalism, not Keynes but Hayek, not Scandinavia but Chicago. The dismantlement of state structures, even those state structures that kept things going, like a special department of the KGB that kept a lid on corruption in the Ministry of Interior, and the eastern expansion of NATO. To get a sense of how much this era feels so totally like history, just think of the words that we used at the time, which we do not use anymore. Nation building, coalition of the willing, responsibility to protect, leading from behind. Cast your mind back to the actors, the mythical creatures who were created by this. Part military generals, part philosophers. Petraeus, McChrystal. Remember what Stanley McChrystal said in Helmand, that he would unpack democracy from the back of a Chinook. He promised he could install government in a box in Marja. Who are the US talking to 11 years later? The Taliban. So as the interventions multiplied, so did the chaos. And the features that endure are interventions that start but can't end, winning the war, losing the peace, choosing allies who are more unstable than our enemies, refusing to count the bodies, and then walking away. By the time I left, the ruble crashed, Russia defaulted, and the Washington consensus was asking itself, who lost Russia? But we could also ask ourselves who lost Afghanistan, Iraq, Yemen, Libya, Syria. Most of these are own goals. However, the chaos is not limited now to the unintended effects of foreign policy failure. There's an internal crumbling of belief and faith in liberal global capitalism. Trump, Brexit, the rise of Islamophobia, the belief that something called Geo-Christian Europe is under attack from Islam are all part, I would argue, of the same phenomenon. They're expressions of inchoate anger, white nationalism, loss of identity, unequal distribution of money and opportunity, combination of neoliberalism and immigration. What's happening to Britain and America, but particularly to Britain actually, is not dissimilar to the crumbling of the Soviet Union, where physical parts of Britain could break off. I'm talking about Scotland, for one. One more financial crash, and what we could be witnessing is some sort of system collapse. Secondly, the angry regional actor. It's been fascinating to chart the change in relations between Turkey and Washington and the increasingly solid rapprochement between Putin and Erdogan. It is not temporary. It's getting more and more solid, and it's got big trade deals attached to it and gas deals attached to it as well. In this city, it's often put down as two strongmen recognizing the autocrat in each other. But it's not that simple. America was on the cusp of recognizing a successful coup, and Kerry talked of continuity, not democracy, in the initial hours of the failed Turkish coup. This is exactly what happened to Morsi in 2013. For the surviving Erdogan, the coup liberated him to purge the army, judiciary, police, with which Turkey could become a much more independent actor. Afrin, I would argue, could not have been possible pre-coup. Who was the first person on the phone to Erdogan in the following days after the failed coup? Putin. Both Russia and Turkey, from very different standpoints, one outside NATO and one a member of it, see themselves in a fundamental sense as Western rejects, unable to maintain a stable mutual relationship with the US while safeguarding core national interests. This does not mean that I endorse the crackdown Erdogan continues to conduct at home. Far from it. The crackdown has polarized Turkey and split the AK party. Turkey needs independent journalists, academics, judges. It needs independent institutions, not a president for life. All I'm charting is the rise of and the use of nationalism in Russia and Turkey. And my argument is it didn't just happen. There was a cause to it. Was it the way the West behaved when it did rule the roost? Was it the continuing rejection of the European Union as far as Turkey was concerned? Erdogan's response to the Khashoggi murder is not determined by what Washington thinks or says, although he's using Washington, and particularly the CIA, as a lever against Trump. It's determined by a much more basic thought. He's saying to himself, it's either Mohammed bin Salman or me, and I'm determined to get him before he gets me. Each see each other as a rival for the leadership of the Sunni Arab world. Then there's Putin. Syria was a war of choice. Syria does not lie on Russia's border. Syria was motivated by the Russian experience of Libya. And when that resolution was passed in the UN and Medvedev, his prime minister, signed up to it, there was a vicious attack on Medvedev. Very good quality film that appeared on the internet independently, obviously done by Putin's FSB, which really tucked into Medvedev. And I knew then that Russia had felt fundamentally betrayed by the guarantees it had been given in return for abstaining from that UN resolution. And I think that was the turning point in Putin's mind, and that was the start of Syria. However, it is, I would argue, a fundamental mistake to regard Putin as the sort of Soviet Union reborn. Putin is an oligarch, not a socialist. He's a conservative looking for arms sales and nuclear reactor sales. The Soviet Union was busy spending money in the Middle East. Russia wants to earn money from it. Of course, Daniel Pipes would say that Russia and Turkey are unable to come to terms with loss of empire. But how interesting it is that I was reading Richard Pipes, the father, who was the arch anti-communist historian, and now I'm hearing Daniel Pipes, the arch anti-Islamist. I don't think that's a coincidence. Then there's Iran, whose influence has grown and grown in the Arab world each time another vacuum is created. Netanyahu tried to get the US and his military to bomb Iran in 2015. I'm not sure that threat has gone away. There are too many triggers. The reaction of bin Salman to the Khashoggi fallout has been to try and encourage distractions. And I reported on one idea. It sounds completely mad, but it was seriously discussed by his emergency committee to persuade Netanyahu to launch an operation against Gaza. Israel didn't play ball. The Hariri kidnap could have been the outcome of another failed attempt to provoke Hezbollah into a shooting match. It's incredibly unstable. And I think I think the Iranian Prime Minister is right when he lambasts the West about disturbing the international order. What he doesn't say, of course, is that Qasem Soleimani is the most powerful non-elected politician in Iraq. And thirdly, we come to the crumbling Arab state. Egypt in 2019 is much more fragile than it was in 2011. 52% of Egypt's population is under the age of 20. 10 million children have been declared multi-dimensionally poor. Poverty rates have increased to up to 30%, according to UNICEF's figures in 2018. The brutality of the regime that imprisons 60,000 political prisoners, secular, Islamist, anyone, makes the last year of Mubarak benign in comparison. You could say the same for the indices of malnutrition and poverty in Yemen and Sudan. There are real social tensions and unemployment and inability to afford household staples in Jordan. Tunisia, for all its ability to dodge the storms of the region and has a constitution, a working parliament and regular elections, is in a desperate state economically. Go back to Sidi Bouzid and talk to the traders. The conditions for another Arab Spring are there. The hope of being able to change anything through peaceful change has of course died, and it died in Rabat. And Europe still hasn't woken up to what state failure in Egypt under Sisi could look like, and the prospect of hundreds of thousands of Egyptians taking to the boats. The default position, no matter what the External Action Service says in Brussels, is that Macron will flog Sisi $1.6 billion of military and security equipment in 2017, while saying on his last visit that stability and durable peace go together with respect for individual dignity and the rule of law. What's the bottom line in France? Jobs. What's the bottom line in Britain? A friend and colleague of mine, Peter Oborne, was once invited by the Foreign Secretary of the time, and after a liquid lunch, to open any door in Charles Street, which is the headquarters of the Foreign and Commonwealth Office. Peter chose a door marked Head of Policy. He opened it. What's the policy towards Saudi Arabia, he asked. 11,000 jobs, came the very smooth reply. Today the figure is more like 9,000 jobs. So what to do? I'm not preaching a counsel of despair, very far from it. Any reaction to the descent we are collectively on and witnessing must be based on realism. We have to realize that the 20th century is well and truly over, and a Western ordered world is decaying, and a new one has yet to be formed, if it ever will be. Stop dreaming about creating new security structures or architecture. I think that is gone. We have to adjust ourselves and the tools available everywhere to reality, and to be able to form a fairer and more stable reality. This could mean starting with small things. For instance, why has the Egyptian opposition in Istanbul, London, Washington, Ontario been unable to unite? All secularists and Islamists have one enemy, a dictator far worse than the one they toppled. Why have I not attended one conference anywhere in the Middle East which has nationalists and respected nationalists as well as Islamists? Why is each group standing in its respective corner 8 years on? Why aren't Saudis and Iranians of vision and thought not talking to each other? Why isn't there a group of economists working on a non-IMF rescue plan for shattered economies? Everyone just waits. But if for some reason that wait ended, would anyone be ready? Why are we going around in circles, vacillating between values-based and realpolitik foreign policy, when we keep on chasing the wrong people to apply those values, and when we don't apply them ourselves anyway? If the UK really wanted to change its policy on Saudi Arabia, stop playing the export license game and start in Lancashire, where the Eurofighter is built. The Saudi Royal Air Force has kept BAE in business. It buys more planes, far more planes than the Royal Air Force. This is where the problem lies. Deal with it in Lancashire by putting those qualified workers to better use. Don't keep throwing your hands up in the air and say, if we don't supply arms, the French and the Russians will. And why do we allow someone like James Gorman, the boss of Morgan Stanley, to tell the World Economic Forum that the purge at the Ritz-Carlton was creative and efficient, and get away with it unchallenged? Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. Before I turn the microphone to our guests, I have personally some questions about some articles you wrote, and I have questions about these articles. The one that got my attention the most, you wrote an article called Israel Plans to Rehabilitate Assad. Or was it was published in your publication on the Middle East Eye.
I didn't write that, no.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah.
But do you think this is really an accurate assessment? Do you think the Israelis are trying to rehabilitate Assad?
Yeah, I didn't talk about Israel. I've just written a big, long column about that, about Israel and the Palestinian issue. But in terms of Israel and Assad, I think Syria is now an extremely complicated, multi-dimensional arena. I don't think either Turkey or Russia or Iran is going to get out of it soon, if at all. And I think Israel is pursuing, Netanyahu is pursuing strategic aims in Syria. And one of them is to peel away Iran and Hezbollah. And there are a number of theories going on. Some of them are conspiracy theories. Some of them are not. I mean, you could be referring to an article that I wrote. Again, this was another mad idea that came from Riyadh, that the Sunni Arab states, with Israel's permission, would set up diplomatic relations with Assad in an attempt to peel Assad away from Iran. And that was actually seriously discussed. I wasn't advocating it; I was reporting on it. If that's the line, I think Israel has got a strategic interest in trying to cut off Hezbollah's supply lines, and that's its chief objective. Whether Assad stays or not is secondary to them.
My second question is about the late journalist Jamal Khashoggi. He was a personal friend of mine. He was one of our first speakers, first event we hosted on Capitol Hill about the war in Yemen. He spoke and he defended the Saudi war in Yemen, actually. My question is about Turkey's handling of the killing of Jamal. I have lots of question marks about how Turkey handled it, and also why, if you know or you have an answer, the Turks kept releasing information indirectly to the press through sources rather than just releasing the tapes to the public.
Well, I was one of those who actually got that information, and I don't know what is in the Turks' mind. I've been told that Erdogan instructed the inquiry that was taking place in Istanbul to find any evidence linking Mohammed bin Salman to the killing. That's what he wanted. I also know that the Saudis were absolutely astonished by the reaction of Erdogan. They thought he would die. They thought they could buy him off. They even actually offered him the end of the blockade of Qatar. That was offered by Khalid bin Faisal, who was in a conversation with Erdogan. So they were literally trying to buy the Turks off very, very quickly, and they were very surprised by the reaction. I think what Turkey tried to do, and I think they did it quite successfully, was to internationalize Khashoggi's murder and to put maximum pressure on Trump. And their tactic was aimed at an international audience, but specifically at Washington, which is why I got the leak, but most of all, New York Times got leaked, CNN, Washington Post. No one else did. And it was pointed here and at Congress, and it worked. And the breakthrough came when Gina Haspel, who's a Turkish speaker, turned up in Istanbul. Now, the CIA had at that time the opportunity to say, evidence, what evidence? They had the opportunity to kick this thing under the carpet. Now, for reasons that I don't entirely understand and know, they didn't. Remember Gina Haspel herself, her had allegations that she was in charge of, a rendition black hole, that waterboarding was used. So she was not entirely clean of, in a different war, in a different circumstance, and after 9/11, of the same allegations, although they're not nearly as bad. We really have to be careful with our language here. Apparently she broke down and cried when she heard Jamal being having his fingers cut off and being dismembered, and that's on the tape, she was deeply affected by it. There is another reason for it, and I'm trying to get to the truth of this, and I'm not sure what it is, but there could be another much more concrete reason for institutional anger of the CIA against MBS and also Jared Kushner in particular. What that is, I don't know, but we're trying to find out. There could be something much, much more specific involved. In any way, Gina Haspel came back and told the truth as it was, which was a surprise to me, and that put the story on a whole different platform, because it was no longer one dodgy president who has a less than perfect record with journalists attacking another dodgy prince with a less than perfect record with journalists. It was the CIA attacking Trump. And the other thing that was really interesting about that was that the CIA, to my knowledge, added to the evidence. And the reason for that is that there was a quote that appeared in the New York Times, which was a quote from one of the 14 mobile conversations that Mutreb, who was the head of the killer squad, was calling Riyadh. And he called with his mobile both within distance of the Turkish microphones which were in the consul's office and out of range of those microphones. And some calls had perfect transcript and other calls less than perfect. And in some calls, all they could tell was the number that was dialed in Riyadh. They couldn't tell anything else. The people, and so when this quote came out in the New York Times, "Tell your boss the deed is done," or some version of that, I immediately rang up my Turkish contacts and said, "Hey, you didn't tell me about this. Is this on the tape?" So they went back again and they said, "No, it's not. We haven't got that quote." So I said, "Well, why the CIA got it and you haven't, if you're the guys who taped it originally?" And the answer is that they went back and retrospectively bugged the phone calls from satellites in Riyadh, i.e. they got that quote from Riyadh, they did not get the quote from the consul's office. So the CIA were actually not only taking up the case, they were firming it up. And that to me is a big surprise.
They what? I'm sorry. They were not taking it up, they were what?
They were adding to it.
Oh, firming it. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. So that whole range, I mean, you could say the Khashoggi affair is dying because of time. It will move on. It probably will. But it appeared, at least for a while, as if the Khashoggi affair had become another Russia or another Putin in the evidence or the charges against the Trump administration. Had become another bone of contention, like for instance Russian interference in elections. Where that goes, I don't know. How far it will be taken by the new Congress, I don't know. I very much doubt whether anything really will happen, but it carries on.
Thank you. I know personally that the CIA knows a lot more than what they have disclosed. I think 10 days after the murder of Jamal, I was with a friend here in the room with a former high-ranking CIA official who gave us details that was published a month later, including that the CIA have 8 recordings between the people in the team with the director of bin Salman's office. What's his name?
Saud al-Qahtani.
No, not al-Qahtani, al-Asakir, Badr
Al-Asakir,
al-Asakir.
yeah.
They had direct calls with Badr al-Asakir, who is the chief of staff for Mohammed bin Salman, and this is how the CIA think that Mohammed Salman was.